it must say something about a conference, and I'll just take all the credit for it, that we have this many people still here after a full day, and that it's this active, which means it must have been a good conversation in the breakout sessions. Again, thank you all for coming. We have still a bit more to do, as we talked about earlier, regarding getting readouts from each of the breakout sessions, and a bit of the summary as we from the administration take kind of what we've learned, and what I hope you've learned from all of us earlier, from all of the conversations earlier today, is that we are actually very actively listening and wanting to learn about how we can make it easier to invest in this sector and how to catalyze the sector. So what I'm going to do is turn it over to Jonathan Greenblatt, who will start from the first breakout session and give us a readout, 5-minute readout from there, and each of the moderators will give us a readout, and then we'll have a summary and a few concluding thoughts, and then we'll move on. So let me turn it over to Jonathan Greenblatt from the Aspen Institute, who is a partner for us on this event. Aspen has partnered with us on this event and will be producing a report once this event is done.
Great. Thank you, Sonal. So I was the moderator in Session A, Shared Value, which was where we focused on the role of both small companies as well as large corporations in trying to create interesting sort of hybrid models to build shared value for broad prosperity. I would say that the conversation was quite far-ranging. It was fairly animated. Even in the time that we had, we came up with several very salient points driven by our panelists, who were Nancy Funn from DBL Investors, Kim Azzarelli from the Daily Beast and Newsweek, and Priya Haji of Save Up, and a phenomenal group of participants. So, number one, we talked about building a transparent legal framework, finding ways to support sort of self-regulatory processes developing outside the government, and government using the tools at its disposal, like, for example, procurement, to support new certification models and to provide and to encourage the kind of transparency and clarity about fiduciary responsibility that managers and investors need to build companies that are pursuing these shared value strategies. So number one, building or supporting transparent legal frameworks. Number two, encouraging, let's call them local sourcing or local profile strategies to reward companies and investors that might hire locally, that might commit to a % of manufacture locally, that might look for other ways to create jobs and to support local economic development. And so examples were given in this case from DBL about the track record of success that they have had with businesses like Tesla, with businesses like Pandora, BrightSource, and many others, where again, sourcing locally, building local value chains and supply chains has been very effective. And number three, I think I would sort of categorize a number of the ideas that we talked about under the heading of unlocking capital markets and releasing latent funds. So we talked about that manifesting in multiple ways where government could play a role to support this field. So number one, mechanisms like CRA expansion and ERISA clarification were cited as ways to bring capital into the field. Number two, facilitating the ability of foundations or philanthropies to use financial tools like PRIs or other new financial instruments so they can invest in for-profit businesses and perhaps add scale to what their more ad hoc grant making might be achieving at a smaller degree. Number three, allowing nonprofits to engage with debt products. Imagine if a nonprofit could take a loan from the SBA, for example. And I'm looking at Sean as I say this. Because nonprofits, they may be incorporated as 501c3s, but with earned income strategies, they can have very sound business models and the ability to pay off loans and to scale through that kind of capital. And number four, we talked about perhaps making it easier for corporations to apply capital to drive social good and to facilitate engagement with community finance institutions. So again, building a transparent legal framework, encouraging local profile, local sourcing strategies, and unlocking capital markets. So I think the commitment from our group, what we agree to, I think is pretty exciting that I get to talk first, so I'm going to steal the thunder from everyone else. So number one, Aspen has made a commitment to both publish the findings of today's meetings later this summer, and interestingly, the Daily Beast made a commitment in our meeting today to leverage their audience of 24 million people in 100 some odd countries to provide exposure and reach for our report and for these findings. And maybe most significantly, the participants in my session all agreed heartily, though some did so silently, to continue this conversation beyond today and to be part of an ongoing process to sort of really work through these recommendations and to be almost as if you would a task force to keep the government and the Aspen Institute honest about where this field needs to go.
Well, thank you. My name is Cliff Kellogg, and while I want to give full credit to Sonal and her team, we shouldn't underestimate the power of good air conditioning to keeping people engaged in this process. I first want to thank Jess Ewan, who took notes in our panel, and also the very lively participants in our discussion. I tried to group our comments into 6 areas. The first concerns the importance of political messaging. And I think Anthony made a very good point that we need to recognize that we are advocating for a new world view that breaks out of the old mode where we thought that government and philanthropy dealt with social problems and businesses only dealt with profit and making jobs, and that there's an opportunity for political leadership to message that correctly so that it creates the space for many of these other more tactical initiatives that also need to occur at the same time. Point 2, we heard in many different examples that people discussed the important, essential role of education, that there is still not enough awareness of what impact investing is and how existing tools can be made available, can be used by the providers of capital. And so I want to call out the education theme as the second point that I think is so important and applies to advancing this field. The third point deals with each of 3 types of capital, or 3 types of investors, and those 3 would be foundations, pension funds, and retail investors. We were fortunate to have in our discussion group several very informed foundation officials and attorneys, and even a representative from Treasury, about the importance of the PRI regulations clarifying and being modernized so that they pick up many of the new innovations, new types of investments that foundations are making. It was noted that less than 1% of the foundation capital is invested in PRIs, and that what is invested in PRIs is often from very large foundations who know the field well. Most smaller or mid-sized foundations are afraid or don't know about what's involved in making PRIs, and since foundations represent over $700 billion of capital, more than 70,000 foundations, if I have those statistics right, that unlocking that foundation capital can be very valuable. And we had suggestions that ranged from clarifying these PRI examples that are in regulations all the way to the audacious suggestion that we might look to the day when all capital that foundations control is invested consistent with their mission. The second type of capital provider, of course, are pension funds, and there has been discussion about how many of their investment decisions are guided by rather conservative advice from lawyers and accountants. So maybe there's an education role even working within the current rules, and I think many of us are familiar with the Department of Labor Bulletin in 2008 that seems to have chilled the field of pension funds in investing in this space. And the idea was raised by one of my colleagues that could we create a safe harbor for 1% or 2% of the investment capital in a pension fund to be freed up for this kind of investing. The third type of investor are the retail investors, and we talked about how difficult it is for unaccredited investors to access these investment opportunities. Could we create, again here, a safe harbor or a de minimis standard for very small investment amounts that would be not governed by the accredited investor rules that currently limit the small investors from accessing these kinds of opportunities. So those are the three types of investors. Fourth point, we discussed the importance of infrastructure development in the whole field, and I think we're all familiar with that. There was a passionate desire for more measurement from the programs that the government runs or oversees. For example, there was a pitch that CDFIs should be required to report annually. I ran a CDFI, so I know how difficult that will be, but it's a nice idea. Also, a pitch that that CRA should include more reporting of the types of investments that are that might fit the impact investing category, and that that definition could be established by interagency collaboration, but that's under the heading of measurement to develop the field. Related to infrastructure, there was a suggestion that the U.S. should get more serious about looking at a social stock exchange that would be publicly owned rather than privately owned, as the NASDAQ and New York Stock Exchange are, and that might also facilitate capital raising. Point 6, that there should be, there's an opportunity for more government guidance as to how its existing rules work. Not only, we talked about the PRI rules, but there was a bank investor who noted that many SBIC investments are not given full credit for when they are outside the assessment area of the bank, and that there should be broader consideration for CRA credit when those investments might meet some of these impact investing criteria. Again, I think a plea to clarify rules in this area. And the last point concerned a rather lively back and forth about what is the right regulatory role for the federal government in this space. And on the one hand, there were those who advocated that the federal government should stay hands-off in tax incentives, hands-off in encouraging or trying to standardize any of these new corporate forms. And the reason for that is that creating any federal or standardization or tax incentives can themselves become barriers to new innovation and to the flow of capital. But on the other hand, there were advocates who said, no, to the contrary, precisely what we need is a standardized federal regulatory framework so that we can facilitate such things as social capital bonds and a much more simple way to know what is and what is not a certified investment. So thank you again to all of the participants in our panel.
Terrific. I'm Jessica Freierich with Monitor Institute and contributed to that very complicated market sizing that we tried to do, if you can imagine, in 2008. So I had a good discussion with the breakout group on trying to identify metrics for social return on investment. And we really talked about three overarching themes. One was, where on the journey are we? In that Monitor report, we had talked about being in this stage of uncoordinated innovation, and we wanted to do sort of a bit of a straw poll, so I'll share that with you. We then talked a little bit about what the barriers are today vis-a-vis metrics, and then spoke briefly about some potential action that might emerge. In terms of where we are on the journey, we asked folks to what extent people really felt like there actually had been progress on metrics over the past few years. Because I think we all like to talk about that, but it's less obvious necessarily to someone on the outside, has progress really been made? And there was pretty broad consensus within the room that actually we had made some significant strides. Interestingly, when we then talked about today, who is being constrained in their action by the inadequacy of metrics or metric systems, actually it was a fairly small proportion of people in the room who said they were specifically inhibited in doing their work. And I think as the conversation unfolded, there may have been a couple of reasons for that. I think even though only a small portion of people were directly inhibited, there were a lot of people who felt like there was plenty of room for improvement in metrics. There was also a lot of conversation about the fact that as this field is growing, the number of many-to-many transactions is increasing, and over time, therefore, the importance of metrics and the degree to which they'll become a constraint is only likely to grow. And I do think this was a group that saw the glass being more half full than half empty in terms of the potential for progress. While there were a few courageous souls in the room who said, gosh, you know what, it is possible that we'll still be having this same conversation 3 to 5 years from now. Most of the group did believe that we are positioned to try to make some significant strides vis-a-vis the topic of metrics in the years ahead. So that's sort of where we are on this journey, which to me felt like still in this mode of uncoordinated innovation, but moving slowly through that. In terms of the barriers themselves, people mentioned a few different ones that I think are worth just noting. One was the importance of continuing to improve the tools to ensure they're truly user-friendly, particularly from an entrepreneur perspective. Another was really the challenge that John Goldstein alluded to in the panel earlier this morning, just the issue that we're saying we're all one thing, but actually underneath that there are many different pieces of the market, and the need not to have a one-size-fits-all solution, but actually to be able to speak to the various different interests of both sectors and actors in this space, which are legitimately different. And I think the final thing was recognizing that while adoption of some of the tools out there has actually been happening a bit more quickly than folks might have anticipated, the realization that, in fact, it will take folks a little bit of time to figure out not only how to use the tools once, but how to institutionalize it as part of their regular work. And so just not underestimating that that will be needed as well. So those are some of the barriers. And in terms of action, I think a couple of the points folks raised were the importance of either enabling or requiring impact data to be more readily shared so people can make comparable comparisons without having to jump through all the hoops they have to jump through today. And I think the second was potentially government or others really moving to support definitions that are in place so we actually can get the critical mass around definitions that's needed for them actually to be effective and accepted as sort of the common coin of use. And so those were some of the specific action items that people thought were important. I will say that while our group had a terrific and I thought rich discussion, it was quite evident that an hour was insufficient to tackle an issue that obviously has plagued the social sector for quite a while. And so I think there was sort of a commitment, an absolutely informal one, to continue the dialogue, because clearly there are a bunch of people who were coming from different places and each bringing parts of the pie. And I think it was evident in the conversation that if we're really in a moment of uncoordinated innovation, we need people who are thinking about the whole and who are making those connections. So today felt like a good first step on what's clearly a longer journey.
Sean Green from SBA. Samir and I co-moderated the last panel. Sonal had assigned all the troublemakers to that breakout group, and so they thought they needed 2 moderators to handle them. And so we talked about everything from the movie Jerry Maguire to communist central planning, and John Bewley provided a concise synthesis of the 700-year history of the prudent man rule. We also talked a little bit about impact, and really just amplifying things that you've already heard. First and foremost, there was a view that with a targeted set of actions, there's a potential to mobilize meaningful capital into the space for specific variables that have been identified before. Changes to ERISA, reducing opacity in and around PRI, potentially amplifying CRA definitions to expand beyond just community-based stuff, and finally changes to the accredited investor rule. So a clear set of any one of those could potentially have meaningful impact, but together. Outside of mobilizing the capital, a strong message that, in parallel, we need to strengthen the ecosystem, and specific ideas about capacity building in and around intermediaries, as well as looking at potentially regulatory or other changes to reduce transaction costs, particularly as it relates to the distribution network. So whatever products are developed, we need to be able to distribute it. So get more money out, then let's build the ecosystem in parallel. We talked a lot, also amplifying messages from the panels this morning about what can we do to leverage existing instruments. You know, a strong message of, before we even do new products, how about a radical idea of getting the agencies to work together in a more seamless way, and do it more in real time, as well as taking advantage, again, of existing institutions like CDFIs. A lot more can be done with what we have. And then conversely, there are important new products or new programs that we need to take a hard look at as well. So focused about the social impact bonds and the potential that they have, as well as things like equity programs, where while the SBIC and the OPIC programs are a good start, inherent limitations on those models, you know, can't solve all the issues in the market, and how do we focus on things like equity programs? So on those things, I think really amplifying what we've heard in the other. One category that I didn't hear so much that really was discussed as well is the power and the opportunity to leverage the bully pulpit that we have here and next door to really accelerate the development of the impact investing sector, and to do that, one, by shining a spotlight and celebrating the successes of the individual entrepreneurs, as well as to convey legitimacy to the space. So as we're looking at, particularly in the institutional investor community, as well as the consultants and gatekeepers, is there an opportunity to, again, use this bully pulpit to show that this is a legitimate space, a powerful space, and it reduces the risk of those who are kind of on the fence, but looking to get them off the fence. So those are specific ideas. Samira's got some broader points as well.
Yep, and one of the interesting parts of our conversation is we were financial products focused. I come from the Treasury Department. We talk about capitalism and markets and the beauty and power of markets to really drive innovation that the federal government won't really be the source of. A lot of the solutions people talked about in our room were not things the government should be doing or could be doing. It was about how do we, the private sector, come together better to create product. So how do I, an asset manager, go to the bank and say, here's what my clients want, help me structure that and create it in this space. Getting the foundations and the banks and the intermediaries, whether they're the ones working with the entrepreneurs or the ones raising the financing to get to the entrepreneurs, to all come together, to work together. And what we hope happened as a result of the conversation in that room is that people met each other, and then partnerships could be made and could be developed that will actually help the private sector be the true leaders of innovation in this space.
Great. Well, thank you very much to all the moderators and certainly to all the participants who spent much of this morning putting this together. I'd like to make a couple brief remarks, and then we'll move to close the day. So first of all, I want to thank all the people who made this possible. White House Chief of Staff Bill Daley, National Economic Advisor Gene Sperling, Domestic Policy Advisor Melody Barnes, SBA Administrator Karen Mills, OPIC CEO Elizabeth Littlefield. I particularly want to recognize and thank Sonal Shah, the Founding Director of the Office of Social Innovation. And her team, Marta Urquia and Divya Kumare, who did a lot of the yeoman's work to make this happen. I want to thank Ginger Liu and Sarah Cannon from the NEC, who did a lot of the work. I want to acknowledge my fellow moderators, as well as the note takers, who had the glamorous job of doing all the transcription. So Jess Yoon, who was already mentioned, Ivy Macklin from Treasury, Eric Bowman, Ryan Ross from the Aspen Institute. So I think, as a couple people noted to me in the hallways, I think this was a historic day. For years, many of us in this room have been working as practitioners in this field of impact investing or strategic philanthropy or in social entrepreneurship, deploying capital and building companies with the somewhat unconventional, at least outside this room, intention of generating economic returns and social good. Again, many of us spent the majority of our careers in this field. However, the elevation of this issue to the White House agenda, gathering a group of this caliber in such a public manner, doing so in a venue like this in the old executive office building, and convening us with some of the real agents of change who are driving impacts across government, I think represents something very new. Many of us have benefited from smaller sessions with particular officials or sidebar conversations at conferences, but today we can thank the President and his staff for shifting these discussions to the public space and giving them a level of attention and priority that most issues, no matter how deserving, simply never earn. This didn't imply today, I think, recognition of the impact and the potential of the impact economy, I think it explicitly embraced it. It embraced the realities of the moment and the fact that our capital markets have developed a momentum that's indisputable. As Melody and Jean stated earlier, these twin forces of impact investing and social entrepreneurship, they represent transformative forces with the potential to really reshape our economic landscape and propel a new wave of businesses, creating jobs and driving financial and social good along the way. However, this will not happen in a vacuum. This will require the continued, relentless effort of everyone in this room and the businesses, small and large, across the country. Some of these might not look like green businesses, right? Here's the shocker. Many more will not. There'll be manufacturing companies in the Midwest, email marketing firms in the Research Triangle, apparel companies in Central California, recycling plants in Brooklyn and the Bronx. There'll be consultancies right here in DC. These firms might not be sexy or chic, but brick by brick and bit by bit, they're creating high-paying jobs, they're driving economic returns, they are satisfying their investors and their shareholders, and intentionally generating measurable social impacts along the way. They're contributing to the creation of what we at the Aspen Institute call the good society. It's an outcome I think that we can all endorse. It's change I think we can all believe in. And so as this impact economy takes hold, businesses have a greater likelihood of success if we can ensure that government offers an appropriate mix of policies and programs and creates an ecosystem to support these firms and ensure their continued success. And that's where all of you come in. I'm proud that the White House asked the Aspen Institute to serve as its partner to enable today. The Philanthropy and Social Innovation Program at Aspen long has worked in this area, but more recently our Impact Economy Initiative explicitly has been tackling the very questions that we struggled with in the breakout sessions and in the plenary. How can our elected officials and policymakers develop the policies to aid these businesses and spur the next wave of economic growth and social good? So going forward, the Aspen Institute will be synthesizing the findings from this convening into a report that will be released later this summer. It will summarize these discussions, detail our findings, and essentially lay out a roadmap to guide policymakers at all levels about the views of these participants, all of you, and develop recommendations on how government can strengthen and scale this impact economy. As with members of my shared value panel, we at Aspen will invite all of you to be a part of this ongoing process and to collaborate with us to determine how we can help the government to build an enabling environment to support this impact economy. So without any further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce the Deputy Director of the Domestic Policy Council, Mark Zuckerman, to provide some closing thoughts.
Jonathan, thank you very much for that very good closing. I think you summarized the feelings of many of us, and we look forward to working with you in the future to move this agenda forward. By the power invested in me as the President's Deputy Domestic Advisor of the United States of America, I declare each and every one of you today the new godmothers and godfathers and pioneers of the impact investing. Give yourself a hand for that. You can pick up your resolutions at the end over there. You are the change that we seek. You are part of a historic change in the way our country thinks about tackling great challenges in our country in a way that is self-sustaining, visionary, hopeful, and represents the marriage of two great strengths of the American people. One, our savvy and our love for the challenge of entrepreneurship, and secondly, the compassion that we have and concern we have for our land and our fellow citizens. I know the people in this room get it. What I really hope that you come away with is that the Obama administration gets it too. We want to leverage our resources in support of this great new investment dashboard, and as Karen Mills demonstrated, we are putting skin in the game. We intend to continue to use the bully pulpit to move this agenda forward. We're honored that you joined us today, and we commit to be good partners and innovators with you, and like every entrepreneur does, work hard every day at it. Thank you so much for joining us here at the White House today.
Thank you very much. The meeting is adjourned.
to have all these people here, but I think we need to move forward to sort of start to find solutions to the problems, because the problems have been defined and the people in this room know them well. So I really don't see that happening, and this is an opportunity, and you said it's a historic meeting, and you said it is a new beginning, that we should move beyond the discussion, and we should form working groups on key initiatives and start collaborating to find solutions.
Consider yourself drafted. Consider all of you drafted. There will be contact information circulated, and as I mentioned earlier, you're all part of this ad hoc task force. So be careful what you wish for, Assad, because we'll be in touch.
And I gave a challenge to my room to send me their impactful ideas, so you can directly send me stuff. If I need to introduce people to each other, I will.